In 1967, a TV show made a cheap, pragmatic makeup decision that nobody thought twice about. 58 years later, that single decision had forced 3 separate productions to spend significant time and money explaining why the same alien species looks completely different depending on which decade you're watching. One budget shortcut, 6 decades of consequences, and a cautionary tale about what happens when you finally have enough money to fix something that wasn't actually broken. This is the Klingon forehead problem, and it's entirely a production story. The Klingons were conceived by writer Gene L. Coon for the 1967 episode Errand of Mercy, conceived as a Cold War allegory of ruthless expansionist empire to contrast with the Federation's principled diplomacy. Coon's only physical description of them in his script was, quote, oriental and hard-faced. That left makeup supervisor Fred Phillips with almost nothing to work from. I had never heard of a Klingon before, Phillips later said, and nothing in the script that I read told me what it was. Actor John Colicos, who played Klingon Commander Kor, stepped in with a suggestion: take inspiration from Genghis Khan. The result was a look built from shoe polish, stylized facial hair, and a pair of raised eyebrows. No prosthetics, no forehead ridges, just dark makeup, a mustache, and a general sense of menace. Budget constraints had made the decision for them. Always struggling financially, elaborate prosthetics cost time and money that production didn't have. Gene Roddenberry himself had actually envisioned something more overtly alien, but practical constraints shut that down before a single Klingon set foot on screen. Here's the critical thing. In 1967, that wasn't a problem. There was only one version of the Klingons. The compromise look was the look. As long as the budget stayed the same, it would stay the look forever. The Klingons appeared in 7 TOS episodes and became the show's signature antagonists, more prominent than the Romulans, whose more elaborate makeup was too time-consuming and costly to sustain as a recurring presence. The budget constraint, ironically, is part of what made the Klingons so central to Star Trek's identity. Nobody was going to fix what wasn't broken. Roughly 12 years later, Star Trek the Motion Picture had a budget of approximately $44 million, nearly inconceivable for a franchise that had been scraping by on less than $200,000 per television episode. And the first thing Fred Phillips wanted to do with some of that money was finally make the Klingons look the way they were always supposed to. Phillips approached Roddenberry with a direct question: could he create genuinely alien-looking Klingons? Roddenberry approved. Nobody in 1979 was thinking about continuity. They were thinking about what the Klingons could finally look like with real money behind them. Robert Fletcher came on board to redesign the costumes. Feudal armor evoking Japanese samurai, a dramatic departure from the glittery sashes of the original series. Fred Phillips sculpted ridged foreheads and gave each Klingon individual character that the shoe polish era had never allowed. The result was everything Roddenberry had originally envisioned but never been able to afford. Genuinely alien, visually distinctive, immediately recognizable as something more than a human in dark makeup. It was also, quietly, the moment the problem began. Because now there were 2 versions of the Klingons in official Star Trek canon, and they looked nothing like each other. By 1987, Star Trek The Next Generation inherited the movie era of Klingon design as its baseline, and immediately had to figure out how to afford it on a television budget, week after week, for what would turn out to be 7 seasons. Michael Westmore had a solution. His approach to the Klingon prosthetics was essentially the opposite of Fred Phillips' original series approach. Modular, reproducible, systematic, Westmore standardized the forehead appliance while still allowing individual variation, a system that could be manufactured, stored, and applied at a scale across a television production schedule. It still wasn't cheap, and it still wasn't fast. This is where Michael Dorn enters the story, and where the production economics of the Klingon redesign become most concrete. Dorn was cast as Worf, son of Moog, the first Klingon main character in Star Trek history, initially not even expected to be a series regular. He would go on to appear in 175 episodes of The Next Generation, 102 episodes of Deep Space Nine, 4 feature films, and 7 episodes of Star Trek Picard. 288 total appearances as the character, a record for any Star Trek character that is considered essentially unbreakable. Every single one of those appearances began in the makeup chair. In the Next Generation's early seasons, getting Dorn into the Worf makeup took approximately 2.5 hours. The prosthetics were glued to his face, piece by piece, carefully painted to match skin tone, then endured through long shooting days. Dorn considered quitting after the second season specifically because of the makeup burden. In his own words, "It was very challenging because they are literally putting glue on your face, and you have to wear it for as long as 15 hours. The production's response was to treat Worf's makeup time as a production engineering problem, an iterative challenge that Westmore's team attacked season by season. By the Next Generation's later seasons, the process had been streamlined to roughly an hour. By the time Dorn joined Deep Space Nine, the reduction was written into his contract. The makeup time had to remain manageable, or he wouldn't do the show. That contractual negotiation is a remarkable piece of production history that almost never gets discussed. An actor's willingness to return to a franchise was directly contingent on the makeup department's ability to engineer a faster application process. The Klingon forehead ridges weren't just a design decision, they were an ongoing production logistics problem that required continuous industrial refinement across decades. For 26 years after the motion picture, Star Trek simply didn't address why the original series Klingons, and all subsequent Klingons, looked completely different. Deep Space Nine acknowledged the gap exactly once, and perfectly. When asked about the discrepancy in Trials and Tribulations, Worf simply said, "We do not discuss it with outsiders." The audience presumably laughed. The production moved on. But Star Trek Enterprise in its fourth season decided to actually solve it. Writers Manny Coto, Mike Sussman, along with Judith and Garfield Reed-Stevens, constructed the Augment virus storyline across 2 episodes, Affliction and Divergence, in which Klingon scientists attempting to create their own genetically enhanced soldiers inadvertently released a virus that stripped cranial ridges from millions of Klingons. The virus spread, couldn't be fully cured, and the smooth forehead trait was passed to subsequent generations, explaining in elaborate canonical detail why Kirk's era Klingons looked the way they did. It's a genuinely clever piece of retroactive continuity. It's also 2 entire television episodes, roughly 84 minutes of produced content, with their associated production costs, dedicated entirely to explaining a visual inconsistency that existed because a 1967 TV show couldn't afford prosthetics. That's the full cost of the 1979 budget upgrade finally coming due. In 2017, Star Trek Discovery arrived with a mandate to look cinematic. Prestige television in an era of streaming competition, shooting in high definition with a budget per episode that would have seemed impossible to Gene Coon and Fred Phillips. And showrunner Brian Fuller, before his departure from the series, decided the Klingons needed a complete redesign. Creature designer Neville Page and makeup effects head Glenn Hetrick took inspiration from H.R. Geiger and removed the Klingons' hair entirely, extending cranial ridges over the entire skull, adding clawed fingers, giving them longer faces and more reptilian skin texture. Their stated goal was to make the Klingons genuinely alien again, as Fred Phillips had tried to do in 1979. Fan reaction was overwhelmingly negative. Discovery's Klingons looked, as many viewers observed, like a completely different species. By season 2, the production had added hair back in a quiet course correction, justified in-universe through an obscure reference to a Kahless legend from Next Generation episode Rightful Heir. After season 2, Discovery stopped showing Klingons entirely. Strange New Worlds subsequently redesigned them back to the classic ridged look without any explanation at all. The same pragmatic non-explanation the Next Generation had used when it inherited the movie-era design in 1987. The Discovery chapter is worth understanding as something distinct from every previous Klingon design change. The original series look was budget-driven. The motion picture upgrade was budget-enabled. The Next Generation's maintenance of that standard was a production engineering challenge. Enterprise's Augment virus was a careful attempt to heal the continuity wound. Discovery's redesign was none of these things. It was a purely creative decision made possible by a premium streaming budget, without any practical driver, and it produced the strongest negative fan response in the franchise's history. Every previous Klingon change had a clear production reason. The one that didn't is the one that failed. The Klingon story is, at its core, a lesson about what budget constraints actually protect. In 1967, a budget limitation forced a compromise design. That compromise was invisible as long as it was the only version. For 12 years, there was no Klingon forehead problem. There was just the Klingon. In 1979, money removed that constraint. The upgrade was genuine. The movie-era Klingons are unquestionably more visually realized than their original series predecessors. But the upgrade created an inconsistency that required 2 full television episodes, decades of fan debate, and multiple subsequent redesign attempts to even partially address. And the one time the budget ignored practical constraints entirely, treating visual ambition as its own justification, the result was the most rejected redesign in Star Trek history, quietly reversed within 2 seasons. Budget constraints don't just limit what you can do. Sometimes they protect what's already working. If you want to see what happens when production constraints create something genuinely brilliant from the start, check out our video on the Borg. Thanks for watching.